going back to having shared meaning in relationships, knowing your partner's goals, why this is an impactful thing for them, can help you really show up and hold space for them in that perspective. The other question you can ask is, what do you need from me right now? How can I show up for you? We often go to troubleshooting and solving mode. And maybe in that moment, what your spouse wants is for you to just listen and for you to say, oh, I get it. They probably don't want you to solve it for them. So asking the question like, what do you need from me right now, gives them the capacity and space to say, I just want you to hear what I have to say. Hi, and welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast, episode number 80. Today on the podcast, I would like to talk about how do you support your spouse through negative emotions or uncomfortable emotions. I like to call them uncomfortable emotions more than I like to call them negative emotions because I don't know that they're actually very negative, right? So I was thinking about this as I was preparing for this podcast, and I thought, do I want to call them negative? And obviously I called them both. So here we are. So I wanted to introduce this idea of like supporting our spouses and partners through negative emotions, how to support them and be kind of their mirror through those kinds of emotions. And I will say this with a caveat. I am very cognizant that our actions do not cause other people's emotions, and we obviously cannot curate their emotions or their responses. However, as part of accepting and giving influence in relationships, I think it's important to be supportive towards each other's emotions. Having said that, it is not your job to change your partner's emotions at all. So the premise of this podcast is to talk about how do you cope with it if your partner is experiencing negative emotions, and how do you support them? And I'm also going to talk a little bit more about softened startups, how that plays into those emotions, and maybe how we can communicate better. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is our relationships and our intimate relationships, how to make conversations about difficult topics such as intimacy and romance, and how to also maybe notice if you are having a lot of criticism in your relationship. Is it because of negative emotions? So welcome to this episode. I hope that you are still continuing to work on managing your relationships. And if you're new here, I am so happy to have you here. And if you're a continued listener, thank you so much for your support. Please, please, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That is how other people get to hear about this podcast, and that is how this content gets shared across the world. Hey, Mama, you deserve a life free of overwhelm and burnout. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. I'm your host, life and mindset coach, Shiro Bergbauer. I'm also a wife, mom, and CRNA. This is the podcast for high-achieving mamas in medicine like you and I. Together, we'll learn how to navigate the ups and downs of working motherhood. If you're looking to thrive in your relationships and overcome overwhelm in your motherhood, marriage, and medicine, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. So before I begin, I wanted to share, this morning, I was reading an email from the amazing Maggie Reyes, who is a marriage life coach who I respect and love, and she just has such beautiful insights of things. And she shared some thoughts that are her core beliefs, and I will actually link her website in the show notes of this episode. But I wanted to share these because this is work that she has done over years, and these are beliefs that are at the heart of everything that she does in her coaching practice. And I have learned a lot from her, and I want to embody some of these, or actually all of them. But I want to share the one that resonated with me the most, and then I'm going to tell you the rest of them. Maggie has these 12 core beliefs. The one that it just hit me so hard because of the work that I do with my clients and the work that I have done for myself. And she says, quote, "A well-loved heart does not go to war with itself or others. improving our marriages is how we change the world, one loving heart at a time. So I just want to reiterate that. Like, if we love our hearts and if we receive love, then we don't go to war with ourselves or with other people. How amazing is that? Like, to just have that awareness that, am I loving myself? Am I showing up in love? Am I loving other people the way that I want to be loved? So I'm going to share with you the other 11 principles that are her core beliefs, but I think they're worth understanding and maybe deciding to take with you. The first one is, how you love is how you live. So learning to love better in your marriage impacts every area of your life. 2, personal responsibility and self-validation are the keys to loving even more deeply and thriving without attachment. 3, you can laugh about things that other couples fight about. 4, one of my favorites, the fight you don't have is the fight that you don't need to recover from. 5, feelings are like water. They need to flow or they become deadly. 6, one person can change the world and one person can change a marriage. I'm going to repeat that because I truly, truly believe this. One person can change the world and one person can change a marriage. 7, your highest inner wisdom always knows what's best for you. Removing any limiting beliefs or obstacles between your own inner knowing is what the coaching process is for. 8, the quality of a relationship is more important than its length. 9, not every marriage can or should be saved, but every relationship can be improved and brought to its maximum potential for growth and thriving. 10, grounded, centered love is the best place to make decisions from. And 11, coaching tools based in cognitive science, neurobiology, positive psychology, and listening to the wisdom of your body can help you have a better life and a better marriage. You can learn and master these tools through practice and incorporate them into your daily life, just like yoga and meditation. And so in this email, Maggie actually, said she invites all of us to pick one of these thoughts today, play with it, lean into it, and see what comes up. And I just wanted to share this on this podcast because the one that I shared with you landed so much for me. And listen, I will always share about Maggie because she just brings such a breath of fresh air to coaching and marriage and relationships. And she was like, if these beliefs land in your heart like a fresh glass of lemonade on a warm summer day, I mean, how about that? And so I am going to link her website as of the time this episode airs in real time. She will be opening up her cohort of her group coaching. And so if this is something you may be interested in, if one-on-one coaching is not something you're open to, but you would like to be in that kind of container, Maggie has the perfect container, and I have no problems plugging her on this podcast. So let's talk a little bit about uncomfortable emotions, and I'm just going to give you some uncomfortable emotions to think about. It could be anger, resentment, it could be frustration, guilt, it could be feeling fear, uncomfortable, even just feeling uncomfortable in general without being able to name the emotion, right? When somebody is emotionally uncomfortable, they may, 1, verbalize it for us, and 2, they may explore their landscape in a way that maybe that impacts us. So what does that sound like? Let's say your spouse is feeling angry. Maybe they slam the door. And so then you have a thought about, oh, they're slamming the door and now they're angry at me. When you have that experience, it can be very, very unsettling because 1, this is somebody you love and care about. And 2, you do maybe feel the responsibility towards supporting them and helping them. Other emotions are envy, jealousy, grief, despair, lots of uncomfortable emotions. Now, I want to be very clear that there are no good or bad emotions. These are just emotions that maybe are uncomfortable. We don't like to lean into them. And it's important to just be aware that they can exist in other people when maybe we are in comfortable emotions. And sometimes we can be in those uncomfortable emotions, and understanding maybe how we can hold space for our partners may help us be able to also ask for what we need. So how do you cope if your partner is feeling sadness, fear, or anger? Number one is to acknowledge the difficulty of that emotion, right? And acknowledging the difficulty of somebody's emotion doesn't mean you're going to feel the emotion for them. It's just being in awareness of, I understand like what you're going through. It's showing up in empathy and compassion. Number two, which is super important, is for you to self-soothe if those emotions are showing up for you and you're having thoughts that cause a feeling of overwhelm. So maybe stepping away from the space, taking care of yourself, noticing your physiological cues that you are uncomfortable with those emotions, and taking care of your needs in that moment, going for a walk, listening to music, just holding space for you. Number three is to remember that in order for you to cope with these emotions, the goal is for you to understand them. The goal isn't to solve them for your partner. The goal is for you to just have a clear understanding of how that happens. How do we then show up? The first thing is we need to use explanatory statements and open-ended questions. That gives our partner the ability to communicate with us like exactly what they're going through in their own words. So some of the cues that you can use is like maybe asking your partner, tell me the story of that. If your partner maybe comes home from work, there's some issues going on at work, and they say, I'm so angry and I'm so frustrated. And you can say, tell me more about that. Tell me what happened. Can you tell me the facts of what happened? Two is asking your spouse or partner to tell you all their feelings about the situation. So what feelings are coming up for you? Because maybe they're like, I'm so mad, I'm seeing red. But in there, maybe there's a mixture of frustration and guilt and anger. And so you want to kind of help them like take these emotions out of the bucket and unload them and maybe just like name them. So if you've listened to the episode that I talked about permission to feel based on Mark Brackett's work, it's very important for us to actually give names to our emotions so that they are not just like things that we're feeling vibrations in our body, but we can actually normalize the conversation about what are they. The third thing is to ask your partner what their concerns are. So in the example that I use, let's say there's some situation going on at work and your partner is feeling frustrated and overwhelmed and they're angry maybe at their boss. What are their concerns? Are you concerned that you may lose your job? Are you concerned that you may get passed over for a promotion? Are you concerned that it's going to impact our livelihood? Are you concerned that maybe it's going to affect your long-term goals and career goals? And, going back to having shared meaning in relationships, knowing your partner's goals and knowing why this is an impactful thing for them can help you really show up and hold space for them in that perspective. The other question you can ask is, what do you need from me right now? Like, how can I show up for you? Because maybe in that moment, and I will tell you this from personal experience, sometimes when people complain about something, we often go to troubleshooting and solving mode. And maybe in that moment, what your spouse wants is for you to just listen and for you to say, oh, I get it. Right? I know that must be so frustrating, or I know that must be so upsetting, or I know you're struggling with this. They probably don't want you to solve it for them. So asking the question like, what do you need from me right now, gives them the capacity and space to say, I just want you to hear what I have to say. Or can you help me come up with ideas for maybe I should start applying for a new job? Or is this even the right fit for me? Another example could be like when our kids are having a tantrum. If you assume that the thing that they need from you is, let's say, your kid's throwing a tantrum because they can't get their shoes on, and you assume that they're so frustrated they want you to help them put on their shoes, and this has happened to me, and you go and try to help them, and they're like, no, I don't want you to help me. And in that moment, really what they want to feel and is like they're confident and be reassured that they're going to figure it out. They don't want us to take the problem from them and fix it. And especially since most of my listeners are women, I think we have this natural tendency to want to solve and problem solve and fix things. And in some moments, what our partners are asking of us is just to have awareness and to listen. The other thing you can ask is, help me understand this from your perspective. Because there are times when we can both look at the same thing and have a totally different experience of it. So, maybe it's the job situation and it looks so bleak and hopeless. And if you show up in the mindset of like, I'm just going to show you, like, you should be so grateful you have a job. And your partner is like, listen, I'm grateful I have a job, but like, I'm kind of anxious about the fact that I may lose this job. Helping them, giving them like the space to share their perspective allows us to also listen and allows us to get out of like the problem solving mode into the support mode. What can I do for you? This kind of remind me of something. Years ago, we were launching a new EHR software at my job. One of my friends was very angry about the whole thing, and she was just so flustered, and I was a super user. Every time she would talk about it, she would just get so angry, and I was taking it personally. I was like, why is she so mad? And then one day I was like, why are you so upset about this thing? And then she said to me, oh, I just hate change. And it was so funny to me because I literally was taking it personally. Mind you, I did not purchase this system. I was just a person helping people with the system. And I was taking it personally, which brings me to how to listen to anger. Sometimes when people are angry, we do have the tendency to take it personally. I want you to think of a moment recently when you and your partner have had a situation where your partner was angry and it had nothing to do with your interactions with them. So maybe they came home and they were in a sour mood and they were annoyed and they were angry and you were like, oh my gosh, they're mad at me, or like, oh, I've been looking forward to spending time with them and now they're like angry and this is personal and they're angry at me and I need to fix it. When you do that, you kind of make it about you. Right? You make it like, oh, if you don't stop being angry, I'm going to XYZ. You're going to have a bad day too. What I want to offer you is when you find yourself wanting to manage people's emotions, check in with yourself. Like check in with what the trigger is and ask of yourself, is this personal or am I showing up in empathy and curiosity? One of the other things that I think is very, very important, especially in anger situations or fear, is don't tell your partner to calm down. Because what happens when we tell somebody to calm down, we are creating the thought for them that we believe that their anger is unjustified or worse still, unacceptable. Like this emotion is not allowed here, or you're doing the most, you're being too much. Don't be angry. Why are you so angry? Calm down. I just want you to know that nowhere in the history of being told to calm down has anybody ever actually calmed down. And how that shows up to the other person is that we are invalidating their experience of their emotion. If we are to be a team and supportive of each other, then we have to be willing to hold space in the sense of your emotion counts and your emotion is valid. What do you do when your partner shows up and they are having an uncomfortable emotion and you want to express how you feel? The biggest strategy to go in that direction is to use a softened startup. So first, like maybe your partner has been coming home and they're grumpy and they're in a bad mood every day, and you really want to tell them that you're experiencing this emotion that they're coming with. If you go with blaming them, like you make me, and then you say the thing, you're not taking responsibility for the fact that your thoughts actually cause you feelings. However, you can use a complaint to help them understand how you're experiencing the emotion that they're showing up with. And so what that looks like is using a sentence that always starts with I instead of you. So I shared this in the past where the sentence that I recommend using is I feel, and you tell them the emotion. Instead of saying you do this or you make me do this or you did this, you can just share it from the active voice, like I experienced this and this. And then describe exactly what's happening without evaluating it or judging it. Share the experience you're having without telling them how they should behave or how they could have done it better. Just experience it from your perspective, but being very responsible for the fact that you're experiencing it from your perspective. And then be clear about your positive need. What do you need? And what do you want your partner to understand? Not what you don't want, right? Like, what do I need? For example, when you so you can say, I feel helpless when you are, slamming the door because you are feeling angry. And what I need is to feel safe, or what I need is to feel that you can come to me and express your emotions and we can work through them. So not necessarily telling your spouse, like, I don't want you to slam the door, or I don't want you to be angry, or I don't want you to, be in grief. And also being aware that we cannot always understand somebody's emotions, right? So one of my coaching clients, her husband was going through a lot of grief. It was very interesting, the dynamic of it, because the way the grief was happening, the person who had passed away was somebody that my client didn't have a positive relationship with. And so she was not able to, maybe grieve in the same stance as her partner. And what was happening was that she was needing her spouse to kind of, quote unquote, get it together. Like, okay, you're in the basement. I feel like you're, moping around. And she was getting very frustrated. And so when we were coaching through this, I said, well, what do you need from him? And when the conversation started about what she didn't need, I helped her redirect it to, what did you actually need, right? Because, in this moment, we have a child, we're trying to parent, and what I need from you is to feel like you're actively participating in parenting our child. And the reason it was difficult for her to maybe step in and hold space for her husband was because she just didn't have the awareness of his needs as far as his emotional needs, because he was grieving somebody that she had very little relationship with or regard for. So just in that sense, be willing to, when you hold space for somebody, you don't have to 100% get it. But what I actually offered her was to think, what would you want if you lost a loved one? What would you want from your spouse? And, showing up in empathy, compassion, and curiosity helped her understand that her husband didn't want her to be crying alongside him or, trying to solve the problems for him. He just wanted her to understand, why this grief was so complex. The other thing is, be polite. That sounds like a no-brainer, but sometimes when the other person is angry and we want to express our needs, sometimes we can show up in very petty or dismissive and impolite ways, and that does not land very well with a person who's already experiencing a negative emotion. Also, one way you can kind of create a softened startup in your relationship is to show appreciation and express what you need by also telling your spouse what you appreciate about them, what is going well in your relationship, what is working, instead of showing up and telling them what they're doing wrong. Showing them what you appreciate about the relationship and them, and then expressing your startup. Last but not least is, don't store things up. So sometimes what happens, and I am just as guilty of this as some of my clients are, there will be some sort of emotional breakdown and your partner shows up in a negative emotion, and then you decide to remind them of the thing that happened in 2017, and then in 2020 they said this thing, and then in 2021 they forgot to do this thing. When you store so many things up, it's like you have this bank account of receipts to one up your partner. I want you to just check in with yourself and ask yourself, what does that bring into the present argument or situation that you think that is worth showing up and discussing in that conversation? Is it worth it? Is it worth the mind drama? Is it worth continuing resentment or arguing that happens? So that was the part about dealing with your partner's uncomfortable emotions. So now we're going to kind of change gears a little bit. And we are going to talk about intimacy in terms of when negative emotions come up. I wanted to share some pointers of how to make intimacy more personal and romantic, sex in general. And by no means am I a sex coach, but I think these are again, are research-based strategies from the Gottman Institute. And I think we can all learn from just the basics of it. One is to redefine what you mean by sex. What that means is decide for yourself what your intimacy will look like between the two of you as a couple, and also determine what is reasonable for you as a couple. Some people want to have sex once a day. Some people want to have sex once a week. Some people want to have sex once a month. define that for yourselves and define what sex actually means. Is it penetrative intercourse? Is it oral sex? Whatever it is, like decide that between you two. 2 is learn how to talk about it. As you can see, I'm charting into this territory like, I don't know if I can talk about sex in the podcast. And so knowing how to talk about it with your partner is super important. Like, what do you want to call it? Do you want to call it, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Decide between the two of you and learn how to talk about it so you're comfortable with each other. Number 3 is chart your sexual love maps. So I have brought up the concept of love maps before, and sexual love maps just kind of will help you understand, like, what does your spouse consider fulfilling sexually? What does your spouse consider adequate amounts of sex per week or per day or per month? Have that conversation so you can each draw each other's love maps. 4 is have ongoing conversations about intimacy, right? Intimacy changes with age, with parenting, and expecting your sex life to be the same way it was when you first met or before kids can be a little unrealistic. And so it's important for you two to have like the conversations about what do you want from each other. And then number 5 is learn how to initiate sex and also how to refuse it gently. And the reason I actually included this portion in this podcast episode is because sometimes refusal for intercourse, or when your partner refuses to have sex, sometimes that is a cause of a negative emotion for them. And so learning how, like, you both decide, how do we initiate sex and how do we refuse sex if maybe we're not in the mood for it, or maybe today's just not the day. How do we do that in a way that the other person does not feel neglected or rejected? I'm going to share in the show notes a link to a book by Emilia Nagoski, and it is called Come As You Are. This book is such a great resource for women who are maybe trying to navigate post-motherhood, sexuality, and how they want to explore their intimacy with their partners. It's a great resource just to kind of like understand yourself a little better. Maybe be able to have these conversations with your partner in a way that doesn't feel uncomfortable or that brings up resistance for you, like having that open conversation with your partner about your sexual intimacy. So I just wanted to for sure share that. And the other thing that I wanted to share is one of the other negative emotions that can come up is as a result of chronic criticism. In relationships, when one partner is chronically criticizing the other person, a lot of uncomfortable emotions can come up. And there are 2 major reasons why chronic criticism starts to show up in a marriage. And one is an emotionally unresponsive partner. And the reason I thought this podcast was so important is because one of the ways we can start being more emotionally responsive is to be in awareness of our partner's negative emotions and help them through them, uncomfortable emotions. I still said negative emotions, I know. Then the other one is internal self-doubt, self-criticism, and feelings of inadequacy. Sometimes when somebody is feeling inadequate, which is a thought really that they're inadequate, or they have self-doubt, they may start to criticize their partner in a way that is very underhanded, very disrespectful. It's not a helpful complaint. When you notice that for yourself, and when you notice that that is how you're showing up in your relationship, I think it's important for you to check in with yourself and ask yourself, is this why I'm showing up this way? Am I feeling inadequate? Am I having self-doubt and self-criticism? And how can I maybe communicate better with the other person? How can I share with my partner what I'm feeling so that they can hold space for me if I need to? Or how do I share my needs with my partner? That is all I have for the episode today. I wanted to leave you with a quote by Young Pueblo. And this quote is about shifting and changing and yourself. And he says, do not expect perfection from yourself, even if you have done a great amount of internal work. Progress is acting intentionally more often than you act blindly, and not punishing yourself because you still have room to grow. Allow mistakes to peacefully inform your growth and learning process. End quote. I hope you have an amazing week. And I just want to remind you, if you have not registered for the couples workshop, please do so. Go to stethoscopestoswaddles.com/events. It is going to be in September of 2022. And I'm going to give you the date information, September 17th at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. I would love to have you there. Bring your partner. Let's set up the foundation for these 7 principles of making marriage work. And let's show up for the marriages that we want and the marriages that we deserve. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye now. I'm Shira Bergbauer, and you've been listening to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. New episodes are out every Monday. These episodes are created by me, Shira Bergbauer, and produced by Cassidy Mitchell. If you enjoyed this show or found it helpful, please rate it and review us on Apple Podcasts. If the concepts I share on this podcast resonate with you, or you're ready to change your relationships and mindset, I can help you. If you'd like in-depth, personalized support, I'd love to invite you to apply for my Life and Mindset coaching program. Just imagine you and I every week working together as I teach you the tools to up-level your life. To book your free 1-hour consultation call, go to www.stethoscopestoswaddles.com/consultation. You're doing a great job, Mama. Have a great week. Bye now.